Hello viewers and welcome to my first preview for Grid 2 then. We saw some of the gameplay last year at the Eurogamer Expo. They've had a few more months development and now we've been invited back for another play on the game. Now, there's a lot of issues raised at the moment about the cockpit cam. We'll get back to that later. That's something we're going to discuss. But we'd like to find out more about the game, what it's all going to be about. And of course we learnt a bit at the Eurogamer Expo about the crash damage system and where the sacrificing a cockpit, some of that resource could be put into other areas, and we'll look at that again in a later video. But first let's consider the one player mode. It's going to be essentially starting from the ground up. You start in your normal body shop, work your way up to the top racing series. Now that's going to be structured by a system called the World Series of Racing, which is essentially a pyramid system. The top drivers are the best racing drivers in the world, if only it worked that way. But first I wanted to speak to one of the developers, find out a bit about that one player mode, find out about the handling and the physics and what they've worked on there, and a bit more about stuff like cheating, stuff like that, because we want to make sure when you get online it's going to be fair for everyone. Let's take a look at this.
So I'm Toby Evan-Jones, Associate Producer in the Racing Studio at Codemasters, and I've been working on Grid 2. Obviously we've been thinking a lot about the narrative in Grid 2 and how we can sort of put that into the single player career. Something we've obviously wanted to do with Grid 2 is have a real breadth of content. So we've got in terms of cars, we've got content from sort of across the different continents of Europe, US and Asia, tracks from across the world as well, real variety of racing styles. So the real challenge for us was how we tie that together into a single player career and a single player narrative that makes sense and has sort of a natural progression throughout the career. So that's where we came up with the idea, obviously, of this World Series of Racing. But really what the World Series of Racing is all about is sort of including every race discipline that's out there, or a wide variety of them, along with vehicles that you wouldn't traditionally see competing against one another, perhaps lightweight vehicles from Europe up against US muscle cars, or massive grip machines like the Nissan Skyline R34 from Asia. All of those cars you wouldn't naturally see competing on the track. But within the WSR and the sort of mixture of disciplines that we've got there means that they can actually compete up against one another. Grid 2 is a really big game for us. One of the decisions that we made really early in development was that we weren't going to be including any assists in the game. And for us as a racing game developer, that was a massive decision and really bold move. Obviously the team have done really good work with assists in the past on Dirt 2 and Dirt 3. But for Grid 2 we wanted to do something completely different. Essentially the reason that we made that decision is because ultimately we feel that assists get in the way of a player truly understanding how a car handles and how a car drives. So when you've got something sort of braking for you, reducing power, sort of helping to pull you around corners, you start to lose the feedback as to whether the car's understeering or oversteering, how it progresses through that, whether it's sort of a soft oversteer to start with and then breaks out into massive oversteer. And we really want the player to understand how different cars handle. We've been really picky with the car selection in the game. We've gone with some of the greatest cars from all disciplines of motorsport and some of the most iconic vehicles that are out there. And so as petrol heads, we really want the player to understand the character of each individual car. So we made the decision not to have any assists. This obviously presented another problem for us, which is how do we have a game that has no assists, yet is accessible to people and isn't too simulation and too tough to actually nail. And that's really where the true field handling process was born. True field handling is something that you've probably heard before when we're talking about Grid 2. Basically, it's a process, and to summarise, what we do is we start by taking a car, and we work really closely with the manufacturer of the vehicle, get all of the real-world specifications, so everything from weight distribution, torque graphs, gear ratios, suspension damper settings. That's I think it's around 150 parameters or so that the handling guys actually work with. But we'll get all of those real-world values, feed them into our physics simulation, and get the car set up from a simulation perspective incredibly accurately. And for us in the studio, it's great fun at that stage as well, just chucking the car around the track. And when we're completely happy and the manufacturers are happy that that car's handling correctly, then we need to start looking at, is it too tough for the average player? If we put this out there in the box, is everyone just going to be stacking it into a wall, not be able to make it around the track? Is it too hardcore and too simulation? And that's at the stage that we take a step back and we look at the car and we think, what are the defining characteristics of that car? So how does it break traction? Does it break into understeer or oversteer? How does it progress through that oversteer? What characteristics does the weight distribution of that car give it? And when everyone thinks about that car that knows it, what's the character that springs to mind? So we identify the core character of that car, and then that's what we aim to maintain. It's set in stone, that has to be retained. And then we'll look at what we can start to scale back in terms of minor changes to suspension, minor changes to weight distribution, to perhaps eliminate some of the really blocking characteristics. So if it really does just understeer too much, so players are always running wide, we'll perhaps change a few things just to make it a little less understeering. Or if it's so oversteery that it just snaps out and it's impossible to recover straight away, we'll perhaps make it a little bit more progressive on the oversteer, just to round those edges off, just to make it a bit more accessible. So what we end up with is a really careful balancing act. But what we end up with is a car that any player at a novice level can pick up and get around the track, get it from the start line to the finish line, even if it means bouncing off a few walls or running wide on a few corners. But they can improve on that, and the way they improve on that is by learning how the car handles. Whereas a more experienced player that knows the car inside out will be able to set it up perfectly for the corners, carry a drift through if it's a nice front engine rear wheel drive car, clip the apexes, get the perfect racing lines, and really get the best from the car. And that's where the depth comes in. That's where the depth is with the handling model. So we're almost sort of forcing the players to appreciate the differences between the cars and the differences in the handling. And that's something that for us is really exciting as a racing game developer. I can't think of anyone that's done that before. Cheating obviously is something that winds us up just as much as the next racer. So in fact, it's funny. So we've been sort of fighting issues like that from the early days. There's something in Dirt 2 that you may remember, where there's one particular corner that you could wall ride around. That soon got picked up on, but we quickly followed up with a patch just to address that. But it's definitely something we think about from day one when we're developing the tracks, and also sort of the logic of the game. Sort of from one point of view. Quite often with a lot of the real world motorsport circuits, running off track can be a risk in itself, because you get onto the grass, you lose grip, this car can spin out, it's high risk. But at the same time, we definitely don't want to encourage that. So there will be systems in the game to detect corner cutting and to actually sort of penalise the player for that, for a fairer online experience. Wall riding, yeah, well, to be honest, as long as the physics and everything are set up correctly, because we've got a very realistic damage model in the game. You need to look very carefully at sort of the friction levels between different materials, such as the track barriers and all the rest. As long as they're all set up properly and some forethought is paid to that, you can quite easily balance it so that wall riding doesn't become too much of an issue. And obviously, if the player does take the risk of stacking it into walls and trying to do that, they'll soon knacker their car. In the grand scheme of things, I think Grid 2 is definitely following the footsteps of Grid 1. The mantra of Grid 1 was that it's all about the race. That was that sentence stuck with the development team throughout development. It was all about just the on-track experience, that interaction with the car and the track, and the handling, and just that raw experience was the most important thing in the game, and everything else is built around that. That's something we absolutely wanted to carry through for Grid 2, and we have done, and we've even sort of pushed it on in terms of innovation with the True Feel system. We've got a game now that has no artificial assists in it. It's all very direct, yet I think it hits the perfect sweet spot in terms of novice players being able to pick up the car and get it around the track, but actually want to improve on their times because it's fun, and more experienced players that actually have an in-depth knowledge about cars will be able to appreciate the various character that the different vehicles have depending on their setup. So I think Grid 2 is definitely going to be all about the race, all about the on-track experience, and all about the cars.
So some more information there. I mean, it's information that's sort of dripping out very slowly at the moment. So we know the handling now. There's not really much more to discover there apart from playing it ourselves and seeing how that develops. We know there's a lot of work going into fine-tuning it to make it approachable for everybody. We know the one-player structure is somewhat generic, though it'll be interesting to see the RaceNet implementation on that. There's a lot more they can do online, and those online features haven't been revealed to us yet. So let's just hang back and see on that one. And of course, graphics are absolutely fantastic. It's important though, in terms of the cheating point I raised, that I saw a few corner cuts and was able to do one myself. And I just want to make sure that there's going to be slippy grass, or there's going to be penalties for stuff like that, or it could end up being a bit of a mess online. So this preview then, we've not got lots of information, but we've got the 3 new tracks on offer, which are Barcelona, the Red Bull Ring, formerly A1 Ring, and Chicago as well, and we have a drive through those. So you're going to see the videos, and you can link to those videos as well, and take a look at those and see what you think, give us your feedback on them. So I've got 3 videos now looking at that. I've got a D-Box footage as well. Just trying it out. Obviously the D-Box is always massively impressive. It takes Grid and any other game to a whole nother level. Absolutely a fantastic feeling, despite the fact that I was way too big to be fitting in there. And then after that, I'm going to give you my roundup. So what we've done in this selection of videos is you've seen what I've seen, and the information I've had. You'll see my gameplay impressions for each section, and then a final roundup in the end where I take you through it and we debate a bit more about the cockpit cam as well. So that's it from me for now, viewers. As ever, more soon.